Again, thank you everybody for joining Jana Werner and I. And a lot of our inspiration for sort of sharing this is obviously over the last couple of weeks and months. It's been quite a challenging time for people in organizations. There's a lot of uncertainty people are facing, a lot of challenges in the way that we're doing work, delivering work, but also opportunities as well. I think to see how much people have adopted this way of working. Some organizations have actually even seen performance improvements as a result of this. And that was actually one of the interesting things that Jana and I connected on. Jana is the head of transformation at Tesco Bank. So Jana, do you want to say a quick hello?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us.
So we connected like literally around this idea that there was, she was experiencing lots of interesting things happening in her company. And, I was trying to share a little bit about what I was seeing with the different companies that I'm working with throughout the globe. So it was a real pleasure for both of us sort of to connect on this topic and write the paper based on both of our experiences. And, we're delighted to share that with all of you here today. So the sort of fun question, I like to kick off with here is, what has had the biggest impact on your business sort of in the last 5 years? All right, so here's a little poll. I'd love to get your responses on this. Because, often when I'm talking to leaders, they'll often say, well, we had a bold vision about where we wanted to take our company and how we were going to be the best in our market. Or maybe they believe they've got this perfect business strategy. They've been able to replicate the flywheel from Amazon and rapidly scale their organization to 800, almost 1 million employees, or actually the 5-year digital transformation plan. Finally we executed it perfectly, and that's had a profound impact on our business. Or metrics. Actually, yeah, we've finally found the magic transformation metric that's going to make us successful and transform the way we work, or really something we just didn't anticipate, something that was a shock to our sort of system, and actually caused us more surprise and challenge than we could have think of. And this was sort of a really interesting topic for us when we started to think about this question, right? Like, so much of what organizational and systems design is about actually trying to set directional that you want to go to. Your vision is a bold place you want to try and get to. Your strategy is the steps you believe of how you're going to get there. Transformation plans are often the execution of the strategy to make sure that it's done on time, on budget, on scope, sadly, for most people. And the metrics really controlling, if you're traveling in the way and speed and direction and quality that you hoped for. And yet this last sort of point, the unknown, the shocks to the system, the things we could never have planned for, fundamentally often have the biggest impact on the way we work. And yet it's sort of the capability and the focus that gets the least amount of attention. And it's even interesting now as I sort of share this poll with people, right? Like nobody thinks the vision has any impact on where they're trying to go, which is interesting in some respects. But this is sort of the situation that we're in right now. And I think it's important to recognize that, yes, you want to set some destiny that you're trying to achieve, but often our ability to respond to the unknown is actually the most important capability to build. And this is why, for many respects, I've been trying to say to people that COVID is not a disruption. It's actually an accelerant. And if you just look at the largest companies over the last sort of 20 years, we've gone from General Electric, Shell, and Exxon to now being, Amazon, Apple, and Alphabet, like leading these organizations. And the challenge for most organizations is that they do believe the things that made them successful will be the things that make them successful in the future. And unfortunately, it doesn't actually work like that. Innovation is actually much more on an exponential curve. The reason Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft and Facebook are hitting record highs is that they've built organizations that can rapidly respond to changing circumstances. They have high telemetry about understanding how their customers work and build with their products. And that allows them to not only be resilient in times like where they have to automatically go remote and still deliver to their customers, But also they understand changing customer behaviors and can quickly respond to that. So while you have the price of oil like dropping down to negative and even at $0, you have Amazon hitting over 3,300 price per share, which in many respects almost seems impossible. So this is why it's an accelerant. You see these organizations power ahead, centralize a lot of their valuations, and the organizations that can't respond to changing circumstances essentially are falling behind. So this is sort of, what is certain then really in all the uncertainty that we are facing. And the one thing I would say to everybody on this call is this now more important is your opportunity to understand and tell your other people that you're working with that your actual ability to respond to rapidly changing circumstances, to uncertainty that we're facing is the skill to build. And again, this is why these notions of thinking big and starting small, learning fast what works for you become such a powerful mechanism, because it's a systematic approach to explore uncertainty. And that's uncertainty whether we're building new products, rolling out new processes, trying to get into new markets, trying to change the way we work. These are all uncertainties. So when you have systems that you can rapidly explore that, that's when you can actually win. And this idea of pausing, stopping, waiting, that's a problem. When uncertainty is high, you actually need to take action. You need to learn your way through the uncertainty. And again, while taking small steps, learning what works, making it safe to fail, and using the information you gather from taking those steps is what allow these organizations to accelerate. And I think you're going to hear from Jana now, and she's going to talk about actually how applying those sort of principles and practices in their company has really been a transformation to help them accelerate where they're at. So with that, I'll hand over to Jana to share some of her experiences from working in Tesco's Bank and some of the really interesting breakthroughs that they've had. So over to you, Jana.
Thanks, Barry. So I'll start with a bit of context. We started a large-scale transformation program at the start of last year on the back of our new CEO coming in and redefining our strategy. And a lot of that was around changes to our product mix, changes to data and technology, including large cloud migration programs and new feature deliveries. But we also looked at how we run the bank, how we govern ourselves, what our processes are, and how we deliver change, and also more the abstract things like a cultural diagnostic. And those latter things on how we deliver change and what our culture looks like, the diagnostic was pretty bleak. So we found things, we were told things like our processes are considered stifling. We define ourselves as risk averse. We work in silos and people only really deal with the issues in their remit. Our decision-making accountability was diffused, and because we engaged too many stakeholders, we referred to committees, so large meetings, many meetings. We even managed to undo decisions quite a bit. That shows that we didn't really always trust and empower our people. As probably many larger organizations do, we delivered in large chunks, so big, long programs, often gold-plated, and maybe you've experienced that when there are few opportunities to deliver change, people will try and lump in a lot of features that aren't directly related to what you're trying to deliver, and you're also trying to get it perfect. So no surprise, we delivered a lot of things with less predictability than we desired, so later over time. And we had many priorities, which of course drives slow pace and what our CEO calls a slow metabolic rate. I really love that expression. And it doesn't exactly support innovation. The only consolation prize I got was basically being told by other colleagues I spoke to and consultancies that none of this really sounds unusual. That's why people do transformations. So if you are shocked by this list, you're already in a better place and you can already pat yourselves on the back for that. A lot of the transformation work was about changing what we did, so delivering different programs and initiatives. And I consciously from the start drove the desire to think about how we work, because in my view, that's the that's the real transformational thing. That's what really lasts. And so we have been working in different ways, in more iterative ways, in pockets in the organization. No surprise, technologists, CIO teams knew how to do this. But actually none of our processes or infrastructure supported that. So I kept comparing them to almost islands surrounded by poisoned water, because no matter how quickly they would develop features, if you don't have a route to production that allows you to push them live, it really isn't very helpful. Or if you have so many dependencies on teams that don't work in this way, you can't really make progress and get a faster delivery or more efficient delivery. So as part of transformation, we took the leap of faith and set up a few product teams, really true cross-functional teams. And that was very challenging. It was a bit like putting a baby out in the Antarctic. The environment for them just wasn't set up to make it easy for them. They had too many dependencies on other teams. There's lots of ask for upfront plans. Our leaders didn't really know how to treat this and how to work iteratively. And of course, in case of doubt, you go back to what you know. So, which is more of a command and control style, and the ask for benefits and upfront business cases and roadmaps and detailed plans and milestones. And then one really interesting thing we found is when we put cross-functional teams together, as soon as there was a challenge, these individuals escalated this up their line managers to their business functions. So a designer would speak to the design lead, an engineer would speak to an engineering lead, rather than the teams solving problems within the product team. So even learning how to belong together and work together in a product team was really, really difficult for them. But then we had some amazing examples where, for example, we developed new features and we got this cross-functional team sit together and jointly sketch work. Even with the engineers, they sketched features for a new product. And the product owner called me afterwards, totally surprised and saying, this was absolutely amazing. The engineers sketched some cool things that the designers would have never expected. So we had sort of the first offshoots of things working well, but also a lot of headwinds from an organization that wasn't set up like this. And our execs were curious, but not fully convinced. They sort of understood that many companies moved to France and that you can drink red wine there and eat baguette, but what it really means to live in France, they didn't really quite understand. And then COVID hit. And what really happened, or what we observed there, is that those teams that I mentioned that were trying to work agile, they got unshackled. So they were able to really use the ability to work in this way in the organization. And also very interestingly, teams and leaders who weren't very much exposed or didn't have much experience naturally developed these tendencies to work in what we would consider lean and agile methodologies. For example, we managed to spin up a call center working from home solution in 3.5 weeks. We increased contactless payment limits within days, which previously took months. So the slide that Barry just put up kind of shows a bit some of the examples of that we saw on the left, and how we mapped that to lean and agile principles. I won't read all of them out to you. If you have specific questions on them, please feel free in the chat or Q&A to talk through them. I think the key point that I want to make here is that we try to work differently. We set up product teams. We used lots of fancy slide decks and go-sees with our execs and leaders and teams and trainings, certifications, white papers, but none of that really hit home like the way that it was brought to life for execs, the board, teams and middle management, what we experienced during COVID-19. People could really experience firsthand the value of working in small cycles, iteratively, really trying to say goodbye to the idea of that you have to do something perfect, and getting comfortable with the idea to say it's okay that I don't know, because there's so much uncertainty out there. It's actually okay to say out loud, I don't know, I don't have the answer. Let's think about it. Let's try something. I was really an incredible shift in thinking and behavior. And we then sort of coined the phrase, we want to bottle this and really commit to it. So I've spent a lot of time talking to some amazing colleagues who really did heroic efforts to make this work. And eventually some themes emerged. And interestingly, even people who wouldn't know each other from completely different parts of the organization even use the exact same words in some of these things. So it's really, some of that stuff really hit home. And we pulled together, grouped them into 11 points. Now, I'll just pull out a few of them. You've got the detail in the white paper. And one of the key ones was the switch to outcomes. And people kept saying over and over, we have a really clear purpose. It's shared, it's compelling, it's easy to understand, it's tangible, and it's really clear what success means. We want to help our customers, and we want to help our frontline colleagues who are working day and night and just can't meet the customer demand as they would like to. And what that really drove was focus, a single priority, alignment against one single thing. And the main thing that you can't buy, it created intrinsic motivation. So people wanted to help and were therefore sort of had a desire to think about how they can help, how we can work on things. And from there, they went into considering what are the problems we need to solve. And normally in our organization, we would do the portfolio plan and hand people projects and say, here, please deliver these requirements. But here we could switch in COVID-19 and say, what are the problems we're seeing for our frontline colleagues, for our customers? And people then weren't able to swarm around them and collaborate on this. And interestingly, that meant people came together and hierarchies became less important. Silos, organizational silos were less important. And what that really taught me is if you can think about giving people outcomes, you don't have to in your organization necessarily do a big structure change. So working in a different way can happen even without a structure change if you give people outcomes and problems that they can swarm around. And of course, all of that then created empowerment, and this intrinsic motivation created the drive to question processes. So we tried to put a feature live, and we thought, do we really need to go through all the tests and checks and balances that we go through when we put a big program live? Probably not. So we started questioning this. We got decision courage and really accelerated then delivering in smaller batches and smaller iterations. And what I thought was really interesting is you could see the satisfaction of people when they are productive. So they felt productive. They could see they were doing something to make things better, increase flow. And really that led to massive satisfaction. So that's sort of one of the key things I took away, make people productive and they feel much more satisfied with their work. And then of course you need sort of these abstract things like what I'd call the oil in the machinery. A servant leadership. So our leaders started to say, how can I help? People were stressed working day and night. How can we help? What do you need to make your life easier? What can we unlock? Where are things you shouldn't have to worry about? It was an absolute switch. Instead of asking for updates, they said, how can we help you? And they also could show we're vulnerable. We don't know what's going to happen. Let us help you and let's work together. So information became more important than hierarchy and bureaucracy, which is absolutely great. And our culture made a massive leap. We had much more radical candor type conversations. Didn't have to do things perfectly, but we're okay with the idea that we learn and that we implement a little piece of the solution rather than understanding the whole thing. And a really good example here is we had to try and automate a process to create payment holidays for customers. And in the past, we would have probably spent a long time defining requirements and making perfectly sure that every single step of the process is clear, thought through, and we know what we're doing. And what we did here is we automated the first part of the process so that you could request a payment holiday online rather than filling out paperwork by hand. we hadn't figured out the second part, the back office part to it, but we went for it and implemented it because of the pressure. And of course, that's challenging. It leaves you then with the next challenge of dealing with that information, but we did it, we solved it. And it wasn't easy, but we would have probably, if we hadn't had this pressure, gone this fast. We would have spent a lot of time prepping things and signing things off and thinking things through rather than starting small and then iterating. So lots of really good examples of how we work differently and how this just was experienced in sort of all parts of the organization coming together. We ended up with a massive performance leap. Speed and quality of decision-making was improved. Our delivery speed, our colleague morale went up. We then started reviewing processes with, for example, the risk and the audit functions. How can we bring them in earlier from the start, help and support? We reviewed our exec governance cycles. And this is an interesting one. I don't know if you have this have experiences in large organizations. You have certain senior governance, exec governance fora. And if these sit if certain boards sit once a month, people write detailed long papers, wait to go to the board, get an outcome and then move on. If we then suddenly started to have these exec meetings more often, people would spend less energy and time writing big theoretical papers and would also get decisions faster. So by reducing the exec governance cycles, you increase the heartbeat of the organization. And we're experimenting with that as well now. And you really get faster interaction and faster solutions and less paper writing, I would say, or less focus on paper writing. We've started using tools to visualize work, which was a massive insight for people to say, wow, I can suddenly see all the things I have to do and who's the bottleneck and where is it stuck. And even just seeing this makes you look at flow and where your bottlenecks are and how to increase it. We are also starting to become much more disciplined around what I just said, this phenomenon. If you give people outcomes and measures, you can group them around that. And that is really, really hard. It's hard to be clear and experienced in writing outcomes and agreeing them, and even harder to agree and say we are committing ourselves to measures and getting the data to measure that. So that's a really good learning. We've increased reflection. And a term I learned from one of my British colleagues is where we were too busy to chop down trees to sharpen the axe. And I think we're starting now to take more breaks and sharpening our axe. And that's really brought out a lot of things where we say we can accelerate if we remove this little obstacle instead of keep going the same way we always did. So lots of things. Of course, there's lots still to do, looking at tech delivery pipelines, supplier engagements, and many other things. But we kind of sort of pulled all of this together, and we've given the direction from the slide. You can see here how we move from the left of the slide to the right as all our consolidated learnings in the organization. And I think that many organizations that I've heard of have probably implemented sort of basic agile elements during the pandemic and are now at a turning point to increase their agile maturity or not. So I think it's a good time now to start thinking about, do you reimagine and reform and take this forward, or do you go back to where you were? And we have certainly had an injection of enthusiasm and support and are definitely moving in this direction further. Right, I will pause here, long monologue, and hopefully that was insightful and helpful, and I'd be super excited to answer some questions.
Awesome, Jana, lots of great sort of examples there, I think, to inspire people and give them different ways to sort of think about how they're working. So one of the questions, and there's lots of questions here, so please keep adding them into the chat channel. We're going to try and answer as many as we can over the next sort of 20-25 minutes. And there's a few buy-in questions coming up. So how do you get buy-in to fundamentally transform and shift the ways of working? So what were some of the notions around getting buy-in to take this approach, Jana?
I mean, ideally you you have a trigger that requires you to think about survival. You have a market threat or otherwise a change that makes it really clear to people why something needs to change. And obviously COVID was one of those, and there'll be others. If people have this compelling reason, you have a much easier inroad to work on changing how you work and how people operate, how people think, what their habits are. You won't always have that. So other things you can do is showcase successes. So use undisputable data that says we have made this change. We've worked in this way. It has reduced our costs, increased our speed, increased customer satisfaction. It's undisputable. It's something, and especially at the exec level, that is something that makes it much easier to argue your case. And there are lots of measures. If you look at the Accelerate DevOps report and many others, you can see what the ones are that really turn the speed. Do go-sees. What we found really great, or what really surprised me, how well that worked for our execs. We did some go-sees. For example, we went to Rabobank and did a virtual go-see. And really people kept talking about what they saw there and how it brought for them to life, how other organizations are working differently. It really made it tangible. And people talked about this, the last go-see we did, way longer than I ever anticipated, and keep bringing it up actually. Another really good one is storytelling. And I really learned that really over the last one and a half years, bringing things to life, emotionally engaging, explaining, giving purpose to things rather than just putting it into facts helps engage the wider organization, hearts and minds. Another good one is, I'd call that do the splits. And by that I mean, on the one hand, make the case for your CFO. If you can make the case for the cost of change, cost income ratio and other financial measures, you are much more likely to get buy-in. But by saying do the splits, I mean, don't put that pressure onto your teams. So support your teams, not just to think about that this is a rationalization exercise. So use different levers for different parts of your organization to get buy-in. And another example is employ lots of university fresh people or fresh people from other organizations, because what they'll do is they'll go, why can't I do this? Why do you have this process in place? Why do I have to ask that person? So see that you get fresh blood in and listen to those people. Don't wear them down in your culture. And lastly, something that I found really hard and took me a few months is, I heard this amazing quote, if you're one step ahead, you're considered a visionary. If you're 2 steps ahead, you're considered a lunatic. So by that, I mean, don't run too far ahead. Understand where your organization is at and take some small steps, even if you feel they are not getting you to the end state fast, but take those steps and do it with pace. Okay,
awesome answer. Really thorough and thought out. Thank you. That's excellent. And here's an interesting one. And what challenges has this shift had in terms of setting expectations with people that required to deliver in a new way? So the assumption being not everyone has found this easy. So what have been some of the things you've done to help the people who've maybe struggled along the way, and it's not been as natural for them to sort of start to work in this way? What have been some of the things you've tried, or maybe in observations you might have seen?
Empathy. I think that empathy is really, really important. And again, that's something I learned over the last years. Understand where they're coming from, understand why it's challenging for them to come on this journey, and pick them up from where they're at. So there'll be people, when I listen to where they're coming from, lots of listening, you realize they're under certain pressures of regulatory proving reasonable steps, or why they have to make decisions. And it's very hard for them to imagine how working differently would actually make their life easier and not harder and more scary. So listening, understanding where people are at, and with empathy, taking them onto the journey. And that's the short answer. And I'm sure you'll have some thoughts on that too, Barry.
Yeah, well, honestly, that's the first thing that came to my mind too as well. And I remember when we were writing the report, we were talking about this notion of humble inquiry that Edgar Singh sort of made available. And I think it ties in very well with the pattern that you kept seeing in your leadership team, where they would go and ask how could they help rather than try and fix every scenario. And I think this notion of meeting people where they're at, helping understand what they believe their challenges are, and then either guiding them or helping remove some of those challenges for them to get them started, I think is such a powerful technique. And yet, sometimes I think people try to fly in and fix things or force change to happen. But I think if this notion of actually meeting people where they're at, understanding their difficulties, finding one small thing that you can help remove for them so they start to build momentum for themselves, and again, they're learning their way through their own change, I think is massively important. And it seems sort of counterintuitive to much of the leadership conditioning, where, your leaders know what to do, leaders fix things, leaders tell people what to do. And I think those notions really go out the window, especially when you're facing this type of uncertainty and change. So I can't think of a better answer than you came up with. So awesome. Yeah, one of this is another kind of interesting one. What do you think the transformation at Tesco's Bank would have looked like without the influence of COVID? And so, how many months and years, or maybe decades, who knows, without COVID, or how did it help accelerate the transformation? What were some of your, I'll definitely share a few from other companies as well, but I think it'd be great to hear your thoughts on how it's helped accelerate.
Thank you for this question. Of course, as head of transformation, I can tell you that our transformation would have been just as fast and successful without COVID.
Of course, yeah.
But of course, I think that it took away some of the heavy lifting in terms of shifting the culture and shifting the curiosity and shifting or accelerating the speed in which we are looking to adopt and think about taking next steps on this journey, on this ways of working journey. So I think that is probably, if COVID brought us so many scary and difficult things, that's on the business front, this is the silver lining, I would say. I don't know how many months, but definitely many months, I would say, on the cultural front and on the curiosity front and preparedness to change.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. I think one of the most interesting parts as well, and that I've definitely been observing in a lot of these companies, is the leadership teams that lean into the uncertainty, that actually take action, like take small steps and start learning their way through the uncertainty, are building this amazing capability, not only for now, but in the future, right? Uncertainty is not as scary for them anymore because they're building this muscle to think big and take small steps and learn what works and what doesn't and adapt. So they're building this whole new capability to adapt to changing circumstances, which is only what we're going to experience more and more and more, right? COVID is a public health challenge. You might have a technology disruption or a new business model that changes, or processes or ways of working that are going to be impacted. But if you have built this capability and skill set to adapt to changing circumstances, you're essentially undefeatable. I think that the companies that are stepping back, that are freezing, pausing, stopping, waiting to see what happens, they're not learning anything. They're not growing any capabilities, any understanding. So, I think that's one of the real behaviors I look for is, are people willing to take action in uncertainty? Small steps to make it safe to fail so you can learn, But if you're willing to do that, you accelerate massively, and it's just a great capability to build. And you know, I've seen this with so many of the companies, or the leading companies I've been working with now, all through the last number of years, but specifically at this time. So I think that's something to really look out for. If you don't build that muscle, that capability now, you know, you're just going to struggle even more. And I think that's, you know, to this sort of slide, you know, you can like just look at the companies on this slide, you know, and the way they approach work. You know, are they built for resiliency, responsiveness, for learning and adapting, or are they just stuck executing what they know, what's comfortable, and when patterns change, you know, they're stuck. So I think that's a really important notion for people to get their head around.
Could we go with Peter's question next?
Yeah,
Maria?
yeah, please. Yeah. So aside from finding a strong example with indisputable data, or any other advice for finding the right area allies to embrace and tackle first? Yeah, great question. Yeah.
I got some really good advice, and I put that into practice, Peter. 1.5 years ago, someone said to someone super successful, he goes off and transforms one major organization, retailer in the US after the next. And then he said, pick an area in your organization that is not the most important, not the second most important, not the third most important, maybe fourth or fifth, but important and interesting enough for people. Not so important that it's the top priority and you've got all eyes on you. So something that's sort of medium important, and pick ideally one where you've got a curious sponsor who's curious enough to try something new, where it's okay, more okay to fail than in the top ones, and try it there, and try small and show failure and be okay with failure, and then hopefully show some successes. And then these successes, you celebrate them, you share them, and they'll be, of course, partly undisputable, but partly people will argue, yeah, it only worked because you didn't have a full infrastructure issue, or you had an easy supplier to work with. They always argue something, but there will be some things where you undisputably show that working in this way is different. You demonstrate success, and then you build out from there. That's a really good advice I got, I thought.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. Very, very good. Okay, we've sort of there's more of these questions around, like you know, without the pandemic, how do we organize people or inspire people, or you know, a lot of these sort of questions around you know, the pandemic has sort of been an unanticipated shock that has driven a focus for people. And you know, what do you think are ways you can do that when you don't have the pandemic? So I think your answer before was pretty interesting, when you were diving into like a lot of the steps. One that really jumped out to me that you talked a lot about, and it's something I see and definitely try to facilitate a lot, is these go and sees. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that? Because I think even the notion you were sharing that months after you went to visit another company, people were still talking about it. I think that's a very important notion. Do you want to share a little more there?
Yeah, what I learned that from other organizations who were ahead on the journey, and I spoke to my counterparts, and they said, we took our execs and our middle management, and either we put them on planes and took them to Silicon Valley, or we took them to, for example, ING Bank in Netherlands, and we tangibly showed them what these guys had done, how they could really feel and see and speak to the people, and probably also different layers of the organization. We had an amazing go-see with Rabobank, where we talked to a board member, a tribe lead, a product owner, and an agile coach, and the technology lead, and the HR and business leads who really drove that transformation. So we looked at it, and they shared their insights from lots of different angles, and speaking to these people and seeing their enthusiasm and hearing the different layers of stories was really, really insightful. And it basically showed people, look, this can be done. This is real. and it has real benefit. So people started to believe it in that way as well. And I think another completely opposite example that I want to throw in there, which I thought was really interesting. This is the complete opposite. I heard from a financial service company that sort of transformed how thousands, tens of thousands of engineers worked, and they gamified it. So they had, for each engineer, they had little robots that were incomplete, and every time that team completed a part of their route to life pipeline or a process change to work more in this new way, they could assemble their robots, and eventually people were in competition which team could assemble their robot faster by putting all the right steps in place. It's a bit out there, but it sounds great to me, and I think engineers are up for that kind of thing.
I think that's, that was definitely another thing I would share from working with Capital One and their transformation, especially around cloud, like gamifying the process, both in terms of like how people are learning new skills, how they're helping other people to transform, I think is a way to keep it not only fun, but engaging. So people get focused on, their contribution. And it's amazing how much, when you get, incentives that are well aligned to not only the individual feeling a little bit of recognition, but actually contributing to what you're trying to do has a profound effect. I absolutely agree. Or just there's two other sort of questions I think that are really important to answer. There's the funding question always has to come at some point. So there's a question around, how do you fund projects now? And I think a few questions maybe a little bit around the structures of the teams, the transformation team. And then maybe the final question we'll probably take is you've noticed the change in leadership. All right, so what I might start with is the funding question, because I think that's one thing I think it's been really interesting about how you funded projects, especially at this time. Do you want to just share a few thoughts on that? I think it's helpful for people.
That's a great one, and I'm still in research mode, and everyone I talk to also tell me they are still in research mode and haven't fully cracked it yet. So I'm sorry, but that's the short answer, and the longer answer is it depends how you're structured. Some organizations are have a very clear CapEx dependency or OpEx, and therefore it's challenging for them to fund without understanding what you're building. So it's difficult to switch a funding model to just provide upfront and iterative funding. I've literally spoken to other banks, other organizations. I've spoken to about, I think, 5 consultancies, some big, some small, on this topic. There's a really good book, which if you drop me a note, I don't have the title right now, but I'll send it to you about that. And the key that people are telling me is you organize your portfolio into chunks, into maybe quarterly chunks against outcomes that you deliver, and you then structure your funding and your portfolio against these outcomes. And you give people the benefit stretch to deliver, just like you do in non-change functions, where you have a business as usual teams that get a benefit stretch. And you then deliver this chunk of funding and a chunk of benefits against a part of the portfolio in quarterly planning. But easier said than done. Yeah, I don't know, Barry, if you have experience around this.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely share a few blogs written around this, especially around the portfolio management is the key, and I think one of the first exercises I often do with leadership teams is actually triaging their portfolio to what are the initiatives that they're exploring, like high uncertainty. The return is information in those projects, like the information of should we keep doing it, should we stop doing it, should we do something else? Like that's your currency, versus when you're exploiting and sustaining initiatives that are growing larger teams, then you start to see more of a traditional return around, financial accounting type metrics, because your product you've explored it, you've got customers, it's scaling, it's growing, you're thinking about operational efficiencies right through to it's a well-established product in your portfolio, you're expecting revenue and returns. So I think it's helping people understand what's success in each one of those phases and what you're investing in. Like, and I think this is, you know, funnily, it's why Amazon have done so well. Like Bezos was a high frequency trader before he started Amazon. So he's used to making bets in the market to find out if a stock is a good stock or not. You know, you put a little bit of money in, you know, you see how that stock performs, and if it's going well, you double down. And if you make 100 bets, you expect, you know, 90% of them not to pay off, but 1 or 2 will become exponential and cover the cost of all the other bets you made. And these powers of optionality is the technique I think are still lacking in most organizations. They think in terms of pay money, where's my thing? I gave you money, I need a product, or I need an artifact, or I need a thing so I can capitalize it. And you know, it just doesn't play out like that. And I think that's a big change for most organizations. As you said, it's not easy. Not many people are conditioned to think like that. And yet I think it's why, again, a lot of these organizations are winning, because they think like portfolio management approach, just like you manage your maybe stock or investment portfolio. All right. We've got about 4 minutes left. So I think I just want to make sure, if you've one last question, get it in now. Otherwise, I think we're going to ask this question of how have other business leaders in Tesco's acknowledged the accelerated transformation? You know, do they wish they'd taken it more seriously in the past? I think this is interesting because it goes back to this idea you talked about, people trying to put the genie in the bottle to a certain extent, right? They've now experienced the benefits of working in this way. You know, what have been some of your observations now about how in many ways you sort of accelerate that?
I think we have widely acknowledged that what we've experienced and the ask to bottle it is coming from all directions, including board and beyond. So I think people have absolutely recognized it, and it's really amazing that everybody's keen to take the opportunity to build on that, and we're united in that, and it's absolutely fantastic to have that support. Do they wish they had taken it more seriously? I don't know. Hindsight is great. If we all had that, it would be easy. I think they have taken it seriously, but as I said, sort of in the discussion in the paper, it's hard to understand what it's like to live in France if you just know it from a movie or people telling you you drink red wine there. If you haven't really seen or experienced it, then it's probably a bit more challenging. So I would turn it into a positive and say, we have experienced it now, and people have really taken great things from it and are enthusiastic to move forward. So I'll turn it into the positive.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, you know, and definitely the only point I would share is, you know, once people experience things, they have a fundamentally different understanding of it, to your point. And I think, again, this is why examples like these go and see tours, or getting people to take action, to do something like really small, so they experience what the technique is. They experience the gap in their understanding or their assumption about what they think is happening versus how a customer is experiencing something. I think making those experiences is massive to move people's mindset. You know, that you can't think your way to a new culture. You have to act your way there, experience something, and then that shifts your thinking. So that would be just the only small you know, addition to, I think, all the amazing stuff you have shared, Jana. Personally, I just want to say thank you for spending your time both with everyone here today, and it's been a pleasure to collaborate with you on this paper. I think there's so much insights here for people. I think you know, the fact everyone who showed up for the call has stayed for the entire call, which is almost unheard of on webinars. So you know, again, folks, if you've enjoyed today, we'll definitely look to just make this available for people to share with other people. Do please download the report and read it if you haven't. If you have, we'd really encourage you, please share it with people, share it on social media. Like, let's bring this conversation to a wider audience. I think there's so much for everybody to learn. And again, thank you for investing your time to spend time with us here today. I've put Jana's LinkedIn that you can connect with her. You can reach out to me via my website. It's been a real pleasure to sort of share these lessons with you, and we'll be using accelerating transformation as a hashtag either on Twitter or LinkedIn. So again, if you've enjoyed today's talk, please do share the report with your network. Thank you very much for joining us.
For everyone's time and joining, and Barry, really enjoyed writing this with you, and it's great to be able to share, and if I can help, I'd love to. I've got some of the battle scars, so I'd love to share with people and help. And massive thanks, Barry, for organizing this.
Yeah, that's a pleasure. All right, folks, thank you very much. Go forth and transform wherever you're off to.
Yeah, take care.
Well done.
That was good.
Yeah.